Progressions for building a strong deadlift. This video will cover a variety of different deadlift and hinging variations so that you can help individuals become stronger at the hinge movement. Our first deadlift variation is the Landmine RDL. The reason this is our first variation is because it is the simplest and safest to do from a true hinging perspective. That is because the landmine acts as a counterbalance, so the individual does not have to worry about bracing through their trunk as much as a free weight deadlift. Also, since the individual is hinging strictly from the hips, we take the knees out of the equation and make it easier for them to use their glutes and hamstrings to lift the weight. The next progression is a traditional deadlift with a landmine. Similar to the RDL Landmine Deadlift, the front of the weight fastened to the ground acts as a counterbalance and becomes slightly more difficult because the flexion in the knees is added, making it more of a true full range of motion hinge. Our next variation is the Kettlebell RDL. Similar to the other RDL variations, we focus strictly on flexing at the hips while maintaining a neutral spine, but with the kettlebell handle, it is easier to keep both arms underneath our center of gravity, our belly button, and much easier to control than a barbell or dumbbells. Our next progression is the Kettlebell Deadlift. Again, the kettlebell allows us to put both of our hands in between our knees, which helps keep our shoulders tight and our back flat. This variation allows us to bend the knees more than the RDL, so we get a deeper range of motion from our hinge. Before we start deadlifting with a barbell, it is much easier to start using dumbbells. The dumbbells allow us to start to move our hands outside of our hips, traditional to a barbell, but different than the landmine and the kettlebell. But from here, we can still focus on an RDL or a deadlift. However, because we can move the dumbbells to the outside of our frame, it allows us to keep a much natural position from the shoulders and allowing us to keep a flat back. Our first variation of a barbell deadlift is the RDL. That is because the individual can pick up the bar from a rack, create tension throughout their body in a neutral posture, and then lower themselves into active flexion. This allows them to keep their back flat and then load their hips and hamstrings from the top down, making it much easier to fill a true deadlift without compromising safety. Once someone has mastered the other variations of the deadlift and the hinge, it's time to get them to start picking up the bar from the floor. Most people will start picking up from an elevated surface, such as a block. This can be found in the hinge and deadlift assessment to find where somebody's true end range of motion is with the hinge. Remember, just because it's a deadlift does not mean that somebody has to pick up the bar from the floor. Another great variation of the deadlift to do from the floor is the trap bar deadlift. That is because the handles are placed on the outside of the body, similar to the dumbbell deadlift, which makes it easier to keep the shoulders engaged and the back flat, and also not have to achieve the same amount of depth if you were to use a barbell. One of the more advanced deadlift variations with a barbell is the Sumo Deadlift. This version of the deadlift has the individual move the feet outside of shoulder width and place the hands gripping the bar inside of their knees. This allows them to keep their torso more upright, get their hips back more with more knee flexion, and use more leg muscles when picking up the bar. Finally, we have the traditional barbell deadlift. The reason this is the most difficult version of our progression for the deadlift is because it requires the maximum amount of flexion at the hips, a neutral spine, and a massive amount of depth to get to the floor. An individual should only participate in this version of the hinge or the deadlift if they have extensibility in the back of their hamstrings and can keep a neutral posture with their back so that they do not load into flexion and are able to pick the bar up safely.